All right, ladies and gents, welcome to Silicon Zombies BrainWaves. That's on Pirate Cat Radio KPCR 92.9 FM, KMRT 101.9 in Santa Cruz. And we are pretty thrilled to be supported by a wonderful team named Necodex. That's Necodx. If you're an entrepreneur or founding team and you need some help with design and product, these are the folks to talk to, Necodex.com. They've done remarkable work for our team. And without any further ado on BrainWaves, we're pretty jazzed to have Daniel Stillman here on the show with us here, all the way from
New York City,
courtesy of Johnny Nguyen, which hopefully he'll give us a call in a little bit.
I look forward to some curveballs from him.
Something tells you can handle those and maybe even hit them out of the park. But we'll set the bar low. Let's kind of see what happens. So before we get into it, I'm just especially thrilled to have you here because I read your book, Good Talk, and I was telling Daniel, I feel like this book was written for me because conversations have shape and they have like a lot of impact. And maybe there's some things we're going to learn over the course of the next hour that can teach us how to be a little bit more compelling and better listeners and all that fun stuff. So Daniel, maybe you can kind of help us set the table. Actually, before we do all that, you mentioned your wife has a black cat.
Yes.
This is Pirate Cat Radio.
Oh,
there's cats everywhere, and well, Scott those.
There are so many cats everywhere. There's a black cat with like the KPCR logo has like it's this like pirate cat with a little slash scar. There's cats everywhere. I'm just sending her pictures of like the dry cleaners, which is Gatitos dry cleaners. It's everywhere. It's amazing.
Yeah, Los Gatos has a pretty cool history. In fact, there's all sorts of famous folks throughout history, a lot, especially in the literature scene, which I'm sure you'd appreciate, but also music as well. So let's get into the why.
Yes.
What made you write a book?
And if anybody's thinking about writing a book, who's listening in, I'll just tell you, like, think twice. It's I feel like there's two types of books. A lot of people write a book because they have to get something out. And I think the other reason you write a book is to try and put an idea into the world and hopefully attract the right people. And if you're a coach, business person, I feel a lot of people write books for a lot of reasons. And I don't think people think about the fact that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And so just get a partner. I worked with a writing coach and it was so helpful for me. But for me, I mean, I actually worked with a team kind of serendipitously that called their work conversation design. And it was almost 10 years ago. And I was like, but this is facilitation. I used to do a lot of facilitation and group workshops and training, facilitation with teams to try and get them to think differently, to act differently.
Get out of their head, maybe.
Get out of their head. And they called this work conversation design because they were like, we want to change the conversation inside of the organization. And I was like, but you're not designers. And how do you design a conversation? That's the weirdest, geekiest, lamest, strangest way to describe what you do. But they had a wall.
And then you leaned into it.
Yeah, and then I leaned into it. And I was like, a wall of frameworks. And I am just a framework geek. I love diagrams. And I was like, you all have a language for something. I came from this world of design, industrial design, interaction design, product design. And the thing they don't teach you is stakeholder management and how to like get everyone together and make sure that all the VPs actually agree about what to do. And I remember when I learned about design thinking, and I was like, oh my God, there's a method, there's an approach to getting people to move from a question to a thing. And I was like, wow, maybe conversation design is just another way of looking at this thing that we've been doing the whole time. So it actually really sparked something for me. And I just started on a journey, actually. I started a podcast just to interview people. Like, well, what do you do when you're designing conversations? Do you think, what does this even mean to you?
It probably felt pretty therapeutic because it was like a personal process for you.
Extremely.
Also, you mentioned something a second ago, making sure all the VPs are on board. Bezos says you don't have to be on board, but you got to get on the train.
Right.
Have you, I mean,
yes.
Not to nitpick, but is this an important element? Is getting agreement for important decisions, or how does that work for you?
I mean, so like in the most meta way that I think about things, disagree and commit, or if you don't have to agree, but you have to get on the train, are like ways of framing, designing the conversation that is making a decision. Whereas other people would say, we want everyone to be 100% on board. And that's, usually when you have like co-founders where there's like a 50-50 or a, 33.33.3333 all around the board, infinite. Like I have this a lot when you work with co-founders. It's like, no, we all have to be 100% on board. And like, those are both legitimate, but you have to be intentional about how you design the conversation. And I feel like, okay, the 2 pizza rule, another great Bezos rule, right? Hey, we can't have more than 8 people in this conversation, otherwise it can't be a productive conversation. Right. That's another like rule of thumb for a conversation. Or like here, before you even come into this meeting, another Amazon rule, you got to write 6 pages about what we're going to be talking about. We're not just going to waste hundreds of thousands of human hours in a meeting when we don't know exactly what we're talking about before we even get there. Google does this too. Like, let's sit and read the thing for 5 minutes before we get started, and let's all just do live commentary. That's a silent meeting. There's a silent meeting manifesto out there. Yeah. Like, these are all ways to shape a conversation. And I think we've all worked with people who do it well, and we've worked with people who are like, whoa, you are just
pump the brakes.
You were just sliding into this room like hot without a plan. Like, what is going on? And guess what? That works for some people too.
Being prepared is such a beautiful thing. My mom worked at Apple for 30 years, and so she retired about 10 years ago. Her boss is still one of her best friends.
Wow!
Shout out to Jody. And Jody worked with another one of my mom's friends, Jeff Lavelle, who's a surf buddy of mine, and she told me that Jeff. He's incredibly bright and also phenomenally prepared. And she underscored that. And that's something that I think is so crucial, especially when you're making like decisions that impact a lot of people. And, like back to your point about the meetings, because this book really did teach me a ton. Sometimes you're in the position to say, you know what, if you don't want to come to the meeting, then don't show up.
Right, the Elon Musk rule.
Yeah, so unpack that for us a little bit.
The Elon Musk rule?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting one. His thesis was, if you don't feel like you're giving or getting value, it actually comes from a larger principle. So there's this guy, I'm blanking on his name. So if people Google open space technology, it's an unconference. If you heard of unconferences, it's actually like the
2-foot thing.
Yeah, it's the law of 2 feet, exactly. But now they call it the law of mobility.
Oh, okay.
It's like,
sure,
if somebody's in a wheelchair,
inclusive,
or super inclusive. Okay. So you're like, if you don't feel like you are in a place where you're giving or getting value, you should just go to a place where you feel like you are. And honestly, if people didn't have to come to your meetings and your meeting was empty, then that's like a sign.
It's kind of a flex.
Yeah, it's a flex. It's super flex. And you really, in a way, don't want people to have to come. You want them to want to be there. And honestly, if people are in a large organization, how your meetings go is a sign of the kind of culture you're creating as a leader.
Yeah.
And what people feel like they can accomplish with you and through you. So I think meetings are like the most obvious tip of the iceberg of like, this is where it shows up. These folks that I was talking about 10 years ago, they were outside consultant facilitators where organizations will say like, look, we've just got 50 people and 2 days and we need to hammer this out, right? We need a deft set of hands to do this.
Sure.
But I think everyone should be able to do this. I want everyone to be able to do this for themselves, because otherwise it's just too expensive. You can't like bring in a pro for your Monday morning meetings.
Yeah.
That's up to you to make sure that they're valuable to everybody.
It kind of reframes the entire, like, I don't want to say philosophy, but like the energy of the space. And I too love frameworks. In fact, some of the frameworks, which we'll dive deeper into.
You can tell I'm a super nerd, right? It's like a framework, a page.
But you're codifying the whole thing, which is like, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so by putting them into different buckets and diving deep, making sure that each one is well understood, and architected and relational, it becomes like a database that's referenceable.
Yeah.
And part of the operating system, it's nine things. It's people, invitation, power, turn taking, interface, cadence, threading, goals, and error plus repair. So maybe we can dive into a couple of these. Before we do that, I do want to mention we are in a fundraising drive. So if you like local community radio, and if you're listening, I'm guessing you do, then please feel free to go to donate.kpcr.org and smash the donate button if there is such a thing. And so that would be pretty cool. And so kind of getting back to like this framework model, I guess I'm curious how did you walk us through your creative process of one, recognizing that you needed to kind of build much like a house, like a foundation, and then the bones, and then a roof. And then how did you come up with these different buckets?
Yeah, I mean, after doing 2 years of podcast interviews, I started to develop opinions.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, there's this term MICE, mutually inclusive and collectively exhaustive, I think is the acronym.
Is that the cousin to the VC?
Yeah, the VC, or Moscow, must have, should have, will have, or won't have.
Okay.
MICE, it's like my first degree is in physics, and so to me it's like, what are all the vectors? If you've ever done like a life wheel exercise, or like relationship, work, health, friends, community, like whatever I think anybody could, and if anybody's listening, just ask yourself, what do I think I can shape in a conversation? Like if it's going well, how do I make it go better? If it's not going well, how do I get it, quote unquote, back on track? I like to joke, nobody ever has, and yet somehow we all do have a conversation thermometer. We all can just dip our finger in the conversation and go, this is not going the way I want it to go, or this is too hot, this is too cold. And so how do you warm up a conversation if it feels cold? How do you cool it down if it's getting too hot?
It's super, well, I love your philosophy because it's one of empowerment.
Yeah.
Or like, oftentimes they'll say that entrepreneurs have a high degree of locus of control, which is the ability to think that you have an impact on the outcome, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have had some pretty unique conversation, like let's say off air, but still important. Have you ever been surprised? And then how did you manage?
100%.
Yeah. How did you manage that in the moment to I guess kind of correct or recalibrate?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question and the previous question. So like, as I started to talk to people and see who the luminaries in this space were, I started to go like, okay, so David White is a poet. I had his wife on, who's an absolute rock star. She was high up in like the Wikimedia Foundation for years. And David White's perspective is that one of the most fundamental aspects of conversations is invitation. And what invitation means is, if you have to be doing something, you're not doing it. It goes back to the Musk rule. If you have to be here, then I'm not going to get the best from you. If you feel like you're being here because you want to be here, I'm going to get the best from you. And so when I started to realize invitation was this like atomic unit of presence in a conversation.
Wow.
I just start to realize, like, what's in it for this other person? Why are they disengaged? Or how do I find out what lights them up and what excites them? So when things are going off course, I just try to like attend deeply to the perspective of the other person and try to get more out of them. One of the facts that I learned in my conversation research, and it's really, really humbling, Nick, is that we can talk at like 125 words per minute. We can read at like 250. Scientists have tried to measure how fast we think, which is to say talk to ourselves.
Bits per second?
Right, exactly. So, it's like we have an attention span of 60 bits per second, which means I can listen to my inner speech and you talking. I'm speaking to myself.
It sounds noisy.
It's so noisy. There's so many, like, what you said is not what I heard. What you heard what I said, but it's not what I meant. I'm I can think at 4,000 words per minute, which means that no one who's
Wow.
ever talked to you has said everything that they could possibly think on the subject. And so the easiest thing you can do in any conversation that feels like it's curveballing is, can you tell me more about that? Or, hey, I heard you say this. Tell me a little bit more. Did I get that right? And when they say yes, you say, cool, tell me a little bit more, because I know for a fact I did not get it all from them.
That's a big pipe.
It's a huge pipe.
Versus the skinny pipe, which would be like,
you really read the book,
like a chat. Hey, I like to be prepared. Also, I will say that for folks who maybe struggle with reading just because there's constant notifications happening all over, this book is structured in such a way where it's like, it's snackable. Each page is its own thing.
Yeah.
But it also has a natural rhythm and flow to the next page. So it's like you take a bite, it's fascinating, it's entertaining as well, which is, that's half the battle if you can make somebody giggle. And then it flows organically. So yeah, again, if you're just tuning in, good talk by Daniel Stillman, pretty impactful. Especially when we consider that conversations will dictate our success and our friend groups and how we navigate the world around us.
Oh my God, everything.
So
you can't get it if you don't talk about it at all. By the way, I call this a bathroom book, one that you can just like leave on that shelf and read 1 page or 2 pages, maybe 3 if you need it.
Yeah. Go when you can, not when you have to.
Exactly. Go when you can, not when you have to.
The other thing that's I love about reading, or just like consuming content, is that it's intellectually rewarding to kind of find this pattern recognition. There's strategic benefits, so you can kind of leapfrog problems that you come across, but also like the communal thing. One of the when you're starting a podcast from scratch, or when you're starting something from scratch, it's like it's difficult because there's not much of a foundation. I've noticed, and maybe you've had a similar experience, David, is that it becomes easier.
Yeah.
So Daniel, I apologize.
It's all good.
It becomes easier.
When I write my name really quickly, it looks like David. It happens literally all the time. They're mostly the same.
Oh, my dad's name is David. I'm sorry. Anyways, so
hi, Dad.
So
by the way, I should give a shout out to my mom today as well too.
Okay.
My mom, who reads everything I write, which is amazing, has said, "But Daniel, what if I don't want to design all my conversations?" And I'm like, Mom,
that is designing it.
That is designing it, because it's a choice. You're like, hey, improv. I just want to improv. We'll wing it. Improv has rules, yo.
Yeah.
Improv has rules. Yes, and.
Yeah.
Right.
I wish we had a button for like the applause or the mind blown sound effect here. Peter Wang is especially good at that. So like to my point just a moment ago, when you learn things, you can share them, and it feels so good to share.
Yes.
So human beings, I think, are on some level are kind of like content aggregators and sharers too.
Yeah.
So when I was reading through your book, it talks a little bit about the 3 motivators, which is play, purpose, and potential.
Yeah.
I mentioned it actually on the show yesterday, and I said play, purpose, and passion. And I was like, wait a second, that's probably not it. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But anyways, the point is like the alliteration, the frameworks, these are heuristics. They help us understand ourselves.
Yes.
They help us understand others, and we are super social creatures.
Yes.
So like, how do you think about that? Because not everybody's the same degree social.
Yes.
And thank God for variety. It's the spice 100%. Of life.
Yeah.
Can people from all shapes and sizes and backgrounds value from your book Good Talk by Daniel Stillman?
Well, I think so. One of the elements that I started to notice in conversations is cadence, pace.
Page 86.
Page 86.
Yeah.
And
I wrote that in the notes.
Some people are like, let's move, let's get it going. Let's speed it up. And there's some people who are like, hey, let's grab a cup of tea and let's just slow this down and let's just go deep. And both are valuable and wonderful. And I personally think that it's great to be, so apparently 80% of people are ambiverts. right? So this idea that like, oh, I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert, really the truth is most of us get charged up by talking to people we know and like, and also need to recharge our batteries with alone time. That's 80% of everyone who's listening has introverted and extroverted tendencies. However, I think some people love big, like my wife and I love throwing bangers.
Yes.
Like I have an annual eggnog party. The apartment is filled to the brim with human beings.
Gets wild, I'm sure.
It gets wild. We make 12 liters of fresh, homemade, actually it's aged for 3 weeks, aged eggnog. Wow. It makes it more mellow and delicious.
Okay.
I love big parties because then I get to disappear a little bit. And so I think it's great to be able to slow down and be with those people who like to go deeper. And also sometimes a 15-minute meeting is a thing.
Yeah.
If they're hard, you have to come in with a really clear agenda. I believe that being a switch hitter is one of the ways of being successful in life.
An ambivert.
Being an ambivert, but also being able to tune into someone else's conversation and frequency, their style, and be like, cool, we're going to be snappy and up. I can be snappy and up. And we're going to be mellow and chill. I can be mellow and chill.
Yeah, so like matching the other person's energy. And, one of the other kind of interesting tools in the belt that I've learned historically or in the past is the ability to use the last 3 or 4 words of the person. I think this is kind of, there's some science around it, I guess. It's a little loosey-goosey neuro-linguistic programming, I believe it is.
Yeah.
So if I said, I went to the park the other day, I saw my friend Mark, and the other person's like, oh, you saw your friend Mark. And they're like, oh, this person's actually listening to me.
Yeah.
Or anchoring is kind of an interesting one. If you say, obviously you want to work with really trustworthy people, and I'm referencing, point kind of gesturing to myself.
Body language.
Yeah, it's like wow, maybe that's exactly. And I guess that's got to be done with confidence and kind of like understanding.
I agree. Okay. It's really clear that you're a student of this, and you may be. I'm curious how you think about this. There's a fine line. When I first started this research project 6 years ago, I was like, what's the line between designing a conversation, shaping dialogue, leadership, and manipulation?
Intention, it's got to be. Yeah.
I almost feel like the term is like, it's positive manipulation. You're mirroring someone to get more connected to them. You're slowing down the conversation so that they can relax and so that you can relax.
When you and I spoke, I guess it was like maybe a month and a half ago now.
Sure.
You mentioned the polarity map.
Oh yeah.
Which maybe we kind of dive into that for a quick second.
Yeah. There's a lot of different pathways to this, but when I'm in a coaching conversation with someone and they say, there's a part of me that feels this way, my ears perk up because of my love for internal family systems and parts work. And I go, oh, there's a part that feels a certain way. And they say, but I also feel this way. And often it's very easy to go in just a loop round and around and around. So like, oh, I probably shouldn't do this, but I want to do that. Like I want to be authentic, but I also know that I need to show up in certain intentional ways in certain conversations. It's like this is a challenge that one particular client of mine has. I had a podcast conversation with my friend Emily, who talked about transparency versus protection, which is a classic polarity that leaders need to manage. Like I want to be an open door, an open book, let them know everything, but I also need to protect them from certain information.
Wow.
And so what you do in the polarity diagram is you just treat each part really, really clearly. And you say, what's good? What's great? What is positive about this part? And you say transparency is great because, well, I don't have to remember anything I said to who, right? This is what is it? Mark Twain said, the greatest thing about lying is you don't have to keep being honest is you don't have to keep track of all your lies.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're just telling the truth all the time, you don't have to be careful.
It lets you sleep easier too.
Yeah. So you're like, here's what's great about transparency. And we can just map all the ways that feels good. And then we have to acknowledge what is the cost of over-indexing on transparency? If a leader reveals to their team every signal, every sort of memo that's coming through the organization, they kind of do create swirl. And you're like, well, yeah, if I'm totally transparent with my team, they might not be able to focus. Yeah. And then you say, okay, well, what about protection? What's great about protection? Well, I give them lots of air cover. They can focus. There's lots of good reasons to protect them from all these organizational challenges. What's the downside of over-indexing on protection to the detriment of transparency? Well, eventually I'm going to create a negative environment. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Can I take a turn here?
Yeah, sure. Please. Yeah, you got a polarity you're working with?
Yeah. That was in reference to one of the architecture pieces here.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of the two leaders do you prefer to work with? Between somebody who's like super transparent versus somebody who kind of provides more of that air cover?
I mean, I don't have a strong
predilection.
It's more like I want them to be willing to hold an open conversation with themselves about the value of the parts that have got them to where they are now, and an openness to experiment with new ways that can create new opportunities for them.
Wow.
If that to me is the gold.
That's brilliant. Also, if I were to kind of, and not to overanalyze, right, but if I were to kind of step back and view another kind of unlock that I had a while ago, Daniel, is like when somebody presents you with like a red or blue.
Yeah.
I think the assumption is that you have to pick one of those, but you don't. And I guess you just did that, and there was no malintention on my part. I'm just kind of like curious to understand your frameworks of thinking, but it is pretty beautiful. It almost, you can unencumber yourself from this kind of rote de facto dialogue, and what a beautiful thing that is.
Yeah,
is like when it's like, in fact, you speak about this in the book, which is like we've got what's the word? It starts with the D. It's like not de facto, but it's just like the
default.
Yeah, the default mode.
Yeah.
What are some common practices, or what are some ideas or notes that people can think about to kind of yank themselves out of that default mode and be like, no, I'm going to be here now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, just like a horse that's walking down the street with the blinders, I'm only going to focus on what's in front of me, not like I had this idea or my friend had a similar example. Let me interject. It's like just staying hyper focused. What are some things that folks can do?
Well, if I understand your question right, I think one of the things you can do to keep yourself out of default mode is just remember that you have a body. Because we're just here, right? We're doing the wave with a robot. Like mentally arriving where you physically are, connect. Like this is what people love and have woken up to, like connecting to your breath. But you can also just like feel your index finger touch your thumb. And it's like there's just the universe in there. And even doing something like that could just bring you back into the present moment. Feeling your clothes on your skin, feeling your heartbeat, if you can slow down enough. I recently generated a new conversation acronym because I was trying to simplify, because
this is hot off the press.
Hot off the presses. I wrote about this recently. 9 elements. When I was writing the book, some guy was like, 9 elements, that's way too many. And I was like, well, it's a grid, 4 is too few. And so
also like conversations, there's a lot of vectors.
A lot of
factors going on there.
I was like, no, I can't be like, because people with book writing are like, oh, it's got to be 3, it's got to be 5, one thing, 5. I was like, no, it's 9.
You're like, I'm breaking the mold.
I'm breaking the mold. But the acronym that I've been playing with is GRACE, and the G stands for grounding yourself. So if you're going to any conversation with yourself or someone else, grounding yourself in your body, grounding yourself in the why, just being really clear on what you want out of this conversation. To me, grounding yourself is always the first step, and that's the best way to like get everything on track. If it's off track, get yourself back on track. If you feel like you're off track, is grounding yourself.
Beautiful, beautiful. And just since we're at the half-hour mark here, I did want to do a quick station identification.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to Silicon Zombies Brainwaves on Pirate Cat Radio. That's KPCR 92.9 FM in Los Gatos and 101.9 FM in Santa Cruz, KMRT. We are here with Daniel Stillman, who wrote a marvelous book that we're in the throes of right now. It's called Good Talk. Check it out on Amazon or I believe danielstillman.com.
Yeah, that's correct.
STILLMAN.com. I interrupted. Back to you.
Well, I mean, and make sure, tell me again if I got the question right, because it feels like there were two questions in there. One was like, how do I keep myself on track or committed with all the things that come at me? And then also, how do I keep a conversation on track if it feels like it's going in the wrong direction? Did I get that right, or was there?
Yeah. So we had talked a little bit about navigating surprise, which I think maybe in this kind of dovetails a little bit into negotiation, but also just I think it was really helpful for me when you describe things on the spectrum of transparency versus protection.
Yeah,
and that's got to vary so much from leaders. So I had asked you which one you prefer, and you said, well, it's not door 1 or 2. It's what's behind door number 3.
Yeah. Well, the point of the polarity, I think, is to try and capture the value of both. Yeah. It's a both and, not an either or. And usually people are caught in this idea of like, there's a bad part, or I have to choose one or the other. And I think the thing about polarity diagrams, and people to do them, like managing polarity matrices, is like, look, I want to get the best of transparency and the best of protection, and figure out how to, what I call thread the needle, and make sure I know when I'm over-indexing on one or the other. And to the other client I was talking about, where it's like, I want to be fully authentic. I want to be 100% myself. I don't want to have to feel like I have to pretend that I'm not who I am, whether it's in front of investors or my team, versus like, hey, sometimes I need to bring some big energy or confidence that maybe I don't always feel.
Sure.
And guess what? You have to decide what room is safe for you to be 100% yourself. Yeah. And that's a mature choice.
It's hopefully that whoever is leading that conversation has brought that psychological safety to the space. What do you think that says about humanity? This duality of either or. It's a little barbaric.
Yeah. Well, it's simplistic. It's like we want things to be simple.
Yeah.
We really want things to be simple, because complexity is hard, and it's a lot easier to say like, I'm just one way. I'm a command and control type of leader, right? Everyone knows that sometimes you have to get many voices in the conversation.
Yeah.
You need to be a coaching leader or a collaborative leader. And to me, you could Google all the HBR articles in the world about this. They'll tell you like the real juice comes from having flexibility in your leadership style, how you show up in the conversation. And, there's some people who like do not know how to tone it down. They're a fun guy, but they don't know how to be quiet, chill guy. And that's going to limit you in life, as in your social world. Similarly, I think as a leader, if you're just always go, 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 and you don't know how to like slow down and deliberate, that's going to cost you too. So to me, it's flexibility.
You may not, like when it's happening, you may not know it, but other people are taking note.
Oh yeah.
And so much of this is like a social capital game of like who's comfortable to introduce who based on prior experiences. Is this person going to be accretive? And then how are they going to make me look? Yeah. So by not being sensitive to that, to your point earlier, about the I think you said a temperature gauge kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not copacetic or cognizant to that, then it's gonna, it could you could lose out on opportunities.
Yes, I wish I was blissfully unaware of these things, but
do you?
I don't know. Sometimes it is work. I just want to acknowledge that it's work, and I think it's part of the reality is that there's some things that come naturally to us, and I think it's great to navigate life in your zone of genius, but I feel like we often have to do things that we're not 100% expert at. And just like playing an instrument or learning a language or a sport, the more you practice, the luckier you get. So I really believe that anybody can get good at facilitating an 80-person room if they really wanted to. And everyone can learn how to slow down and have a good coaching conversation with one of their direct reports if they want to, right? If they decided that there's value in it and they start to read or notice things differently and start to practice intentionally.
That's beautiful play. And speaking of intentionality, we've got Johnny Quinn calling from New York, who's calling in on Silicon Zombies BrainWaves on 92.9 FM. Johnny, welcome.
Yo.
How we doing, Johnny?
So good. How you guys doing?
Excellent. So, Johnny, thank you so much for introducing us to Daniel. We're in the middle of just a very juicy, thoughtful, hilarious conversation around crafting conversations. And Johnny, you're something of an expert in this as well. Maybe do you want to give a quick shout out to your community and what you're building?
Yeah, definitely. So I was co-host for Silicon Zombies in New York at one time, or contributor rather. I run studio management. We're a hybrid hedge fund, venture fund, and venture studio. Also running and building a community out here in Brooklyn called 57. Really trying to bring people together who celebrate creativity and all of its manifestations, from art to entrepreneurship. And so, really glad to see the two of you guys connecting and hitting it off. Daniel is one of the masters of conversation, and you too, Nick. So really glad that you guys are having a good talk.
Oh, thank you, my man. And
I see what he did there, by the way.
Was that a deflection?
I don't know.
It's genius. Maybe Johnny too is a master of conversation. Johnny also throws like remarkable parties. I think so much of these things are, the people make the place. Mm-hmm. And if you go there and like the lighting and the energy and the people, it can almost seem otherworldly. And that's one of the things I've noticed that the gang at 57 does. Mm. So, Johnny, while you're on air here, do you got a question for Daniel?
For Daniel, yes. Daniel, I want to know, what's your favorite part about Nick?
Oh,
part about Nick?
Yeah.
Oh man, so it's very clear that he's an intentional conversation nerd person. And to me, you probably have this happen to you sometimes too. They're like, oh man, you're the expert on blank. I feel so nervous talking to you about blank. And people do this to me about conversation. I'm like, I'm just a nerd. And I like talking about conversations with other nerds. And this man is a nerd.
Thank you. There's a beauty in that.
There is, yeah.
It's conversating about conversating.
Yeah, but with people who dig it, right? It's
it's
like going to an art museum with someone who digs art versus somebody who just thinks they're supposed to be at the exhibit.
Sure. Yeah.
You see it, you get it, and you have your own. He just said the people make the place, and I was like, whoa, that's really deep.
Mm.
It's really, really deep because you could try to separate the place out, and obviously the place is the place. We've tried to have parties in really hard places, and you have to do something to the place to make it better. You're we got to put some rugs here, something. But the people are the place of the conversation. I think that's really profound. I think it's beautiful.
I appreciate that. It's always fun to internalize these kinds of things when you learn from other people that are experts like yourself, because then it becomes part of you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're an intentional player. I'm going to have him on my podcast, by the way, Johnny, and be like, okay, what are you doing when you're interviewing people? Because it's something that some people do intentionally. I had my friend Grant Random, who is a SiriusXM interviewer, on my podcast ages ago. I was like, okay, man, how do you interview a rock star? He's like, don't ask them the questions that they always get asked, because that's his MO. And so Nick has clearly putting thought, care, and love into the process. So that's my favorite thing about Nick.
That's a wonderful. I'm going to clip that. That's going out onto all the different social medias. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, well, and I have a question for you, Johnny.
Turning the tables here.
I know that you've been doing some experiments on how to like bring people together at events and how to like make sure people like get some of the social juice out of. I think a lot of times people go to events and the promise of the event or the conference is much higher than the actual deliverable. And Nick, you probably have an opinion about this too. People want to connect. They don't want to just sit there and listen. Didn't you do, I feel like it was like last week or it's next week, you're doing some experiments with pairing people up in your community, live and direct.
I'm actually at one of our events right now. I stepped out just to talk to you guys.
Oh, wow. I should not surprise.
We run an event series here in New York called Founders, Funders, and Friends, in which we try to bring good people together in the entrepreneurial world. And one of the things that we're doing is we're using AI to group people based on their common interests. And so right now we have a little meetup where when you come to the event, ahead of time, we text you your group and the people in your group. So you come to the event and you already have a group of people to connect with based on shared interests.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is really in trying to solve the problem of, I feel I don't enjoy the feeling of going to a party and not knowing anybody.
Yeah.
And I'm already an extroverted person, so I can't imagine what it must be like for someone who's not as extroverted to just show up to a party and not know anybody. And so we just want to make it a little bit easier for people to break the ice, to connect, and really just using that as an entree into deepening conversation, which is what it's all about, right?
Wow.
Like ultimately, so much of this and conversation in general, which is why I think like the book is so powerful, is about mining the depths of each other, right? Mining the depths of someone's mind or soul, and really thinking, mining is one analogy, but Nick, you and I are surfers. Like on some level, like surfing is another interesting analogy where, I think about it like waves that meet on the shore when you have two minds that approach, retreat, explore, dance, thoughts that dance and ebb and flow, where each pause between a conversation becomes a gentle space of understanding, and just finding space between breaths to come to understanding.
So Johnny, following that analogy, what would a double up barrel be? Like an aha moment, or like
that is a moment of insight. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be the aha moment.
The real gems.
Yeah.
Speaking of gems, Johnny Quinn, you are a gem. I assume that this is a great way to expand the community for what you're building and investing in studio management. Do you want to give a quick shout out for folks that are listening to maybe a website?
Yeah, check out Founders, Funders, and Friends.com for all of our events. We're starting here in New York, but we'll be expanding soon to the Bay Area. You'll see information about studio management there as well, and feel free to reach out.
Beautiful, Johnny Quinn.
Awesome.
Thank you for calling in, my friend. Much appreciated.
Much love. Happy holidays.
All right.
Thanks for stopping by, bro. He really is a sweetheart.
Yeah, and all the way from New York.
I know it's like a terrible day.
Gotta love technology.
The events actually really are lovely. He does it's like people are hungry to connect, and then to find a way to bridge the gap, to give them a smaller circle of people to connect with is it's a good bridge.
So it's a lot of work, but it also makes you feel like when you show up, it's like I'm supposed to be here. People, not only do the organizers know that I'm here, but they put thought into who would be interesting for me to build a relationship with, and everything is so relational driven. It's like if we can level up the quality of the integrity and the ambition and the excitement and the love of the people we're with, that's going to have like profound implications or impact on our life, which is
and the world, literally. I will also make a shout out to I'm going to have them on my podcast in the new year, a documentary called Join or Die. It's actually on Netflix now. it's about the work of Robert Putnam and around social capital. He wrote the book Bowling Alone. It's this guy, Pete Davis, and his sister Rebecca Davis. He's written a book called Committed, and she was in the filmmaking world, and she was the director. I think a brother sister team is like really delightful.
Yeah.
And it's all about how we used to have more clubs in the United States, and it's really important to have community, and it's what democracy depends on. We need to be connected to more people in order for us to have a society and to be able to talk to each other, which is of course something that is very hard to do, especially across difference.
So you're saying hanging out, getting together is just more American.
This is the most American thing that I've done today. We are talking.
Well, you, sir,
We should crack a
are
beer.
a patriot.
I am. Like, because if we can't talk about it, then we can't get it. We can't do anything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really, really hard. I feel like I've learned so much about, what kind of levers to pull to make it more possible. And I think it's important. Shout out to Join or Die. Check it out. If you have Netflix, check it out.
First of all, congrats on that. That's super cool. When reading through this book, I read something, and in fact, it was a little serendipitous. So it says, let's see, understanding the patterns behind things is an intellectual pleasure, which is where I took that from earlier.
Yeah.
But there's a practical value too. If we know the principles on which something is built, we can build it better.
Yeah.
Or adapt those principles to other contexts. Biomimicry, for example, works to learn how nature makes amazing materials and how to apply those insights. In fact, we were just talking about biomimicry just yesterday, which is how Velcro came about, interestingly enough.
So cool.
Learning how geckos stick to walls led to the development of new types of adhesives. So this is so cool. Just this morning, I was on a prep call for our January 7 show for Silicon Zombies, which is going to be at the Park James, 5 p.m. Pacific, 1400 El Camino. It's free. Show up and hang. And it's the title of the talk is Molecules and Microchips. So naming these shows is like my favorite part. And of course, getting the folks together too. But Dr. Capella Kirst, Stanford PhD, just won first place in the Startup Grind pitch competition. Second place at TechCrunch Disrupt, which was maybe like a couple months ago. In fact, we got to speak there. We did a zombies episode at Disrupt. But Dr. Capella, created an adhesive that's used on the International Space Station, and it's called Gecko Materials.
That's awesome.
So the fact that this is in here, I was like, okay,
so serendipitous.
we're on the right track.
Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, can I say what Johnny's doing at his gatherings? I mean, it's just cells, right? This is what nature does. We don't have just like a big mass. We have cells within cells. We have organelles.
CELLS.
Yeah.
Right.
CELLS.
Okay.
70 people is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And 5 people is a little cozier.
Yeah.
Pairs are like, that's like the atomic unit, although we have conversations with ourselves, obviously. But Johnny I don't think is saying, oh, biomimicry. But there's an organizing principle. Like, let's take something big and divide it up in an intelligent way. And so to me, I feel like being more intentional in your conversations can look naturalistic in lots of ways. You can say, well, what's the wave? What's the second wave? What's the third wave? Let's how is this conference going to be like the tides? We're going to like have a slack tide, then we're going to have high tide, then we're going to have low tide. Like whatever, you can have a metaphor that can make things easier for you.
And that's inspiration too, where a lot of people maybe they'll stop because they're not thinking outside the box. But if you show up and you're just like, throw me your craziest ideas, there'll be no judgment. This is like and guess what? One person's crazy ideas might trigger somebody else's crazy ideas. And before you know it, you've cracked the problem. And of course, like play is an important element of that too. It's like if you're working 24/7, go for a walk, go hang out. In fact, Steve Jobs was a big fan of walks.
Yes.
In fact, rather than being at a boardroom, holding your cards like this, it's like, no, you're headed in the same direction. You're shoulder to shoulder. There's also some science that comes into play, where it's just like you're getting more oxygen, which actually helps with memory retention, and it helps with comprehension.
Yes.
So there's so much positivity for just like going outside and getting some,
Yeah, and it's just changing the place changes the conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's very, very easy. So the acronym I was talking about way earlier, GRACE.
GRACE, yeah, thank you.
The second, well, it's fine. The R stands for, is this in the right channel? And channel is another way of saying, are we in the right place? There's like one of these classic internet memes where it's like somebody throwing a table over saying, clearly you didn't understand my text message, right? There's a great Key and Peele skit where they're like having an argument over text message, but one guy is just like, yeah, sure, let's hang out whenever. And the other guy's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Right? And having the conversation in the right channel it's just so important. Having a conversation at the beach is really different than having it in a boardroom. Whiteboards are amazing. Having a whiteboard changes the conversation. It's extraordinary. But there's a book called Sand Talk. It's about the Aboriginal forms of dialogue. Drawing on the sand is it's not a whiteboard. You can't. It's not quite as detailed. You can't have multiple colors, but drawing something out on sand together, that's a great way to have a conversation. But it's different.
Yeah.
It's a different vibe.
It's like you're kind of introducing like an artistic creativity, which is you're engaging different parts of the person's brain.
Totally.
And it's got to be different for every person. For example, connected to some executives, and if you call them in the middle of the day with something that is A, not time sensitive, or B, would suffice over like say a text, you're gonna actually have negative social ramifications there. So maybe this kind of goes back into knowing, I don't know if it's maybe knowing your audience, maybe there's a little bit of that. Sure. But knowing what channels are appropriate for the right time and place.
Totally. I love text messaging, and we've all had that experience back in the day when we used to bar hop. Maybe when somebody tried to call you and you're like, I just texted you where we are. Just come to where we are. Why are you trying to call me when I'm in a loud place? I can't talk to you right now. It's the wrong channel. It's just literally the wrong channel.
So one of the other things that I was really intrigued by is this concept of like self-talk, because when you're talking to somebody else, I guess you're also kind of talking with yourself, or I guess innately there needs to be some kind of cohesion to show up and deliver so you can focus. How do we talk to ourselves, and how do we not talk to ourselves so we can be 100% focused on the person? Is that even possible? I'm not sure.
It's a really great question. First of all, everyone apparently does not talk to themselves. Some people do not have inner voices, but it's a very small, very small portion of the universe. I think the biggest challenge with self-talk is when it's negative, just on ourselves, when we're not even talking to somebody. And that to me is something I've worked through. I'm sure everyone here who's listening in at some point has been hard on themselves, called themselves an idiot. And we tax ourselves very heavily when we do that. So the best thing you can do if you're suffering from negative internal self-talk is to refer to yourself by your full name and try to slow it down and write it out. It allows you to just get out of the loop and just read everything that you're writing to yourself and just look at it and see if you can be with that for just a minute. What to do with it afterwards, you can try to write the opposite, see if you can believe the opposite, or just accept that that's what's going on right now. That's fine. That's step one for inner talk. The question you're asking, which is like, how do I not plan where I want to go to next? Because like you and I, we're
improv.
We're improv, but you're also like, you're seeing pathways and you're thinking about directions to go. And it can be really hard to just let go and go to jazz conversations. And
Well, they all look beautiful. Yeah, every direction.
Right. Any direction. But like, we are all trying to guess where the conversation's going in a way.
It would be boring if we knew.
Right, for sure.
Like,
but I think we often try to like figure out where someone's going and finish their sentence for them. So like, yeah, okay, I get it. What about this? Slowing down. So that's the third letter of grace. Attend deeply. And attending deeply to someone, listening not to respond, but listening to absorb, listening to understand, listening for what's unsaid, listening for Nick's whole body language change. She's like, oh wait, I'm being called to a higher
good stuff.
So
I'm leaning in for all our radio
It's
listeners.
really hard work. And so I actually had a guy on my podcast whose whole thing was listening deeply. And I asked him, how do you do it? How do you listen more deeply? And he was like, just stay more hydrated. And I was like, that's such an unsatisfying answer. But actually having a glass of water nearby allows you to just like, when someone finishes, we want to ask a question that will move the conversation forward.
Yeah.
Instead, we can take a glass of water. Usually when someone is done talking, there's always more because they've been thinking about this for their whole lives, 4,000 words per minute. And if you just take a glass of water and just take a little sip, they might actually say something else. And you don't have to do anything. If you listen on NPR all the time, they just go, anybody here who, like, if you listen to NPR, you will start hearing this more and it will make you laugh. My wife and I laugh when we hear someone do this. She's like,
Yeah.
And that's a way of just letting someone know that they're heard and giving some space for them to say more. So I think attending deeply, listening to everything that they're saying, not trying to decide where you think the conversation should go, because you're like, this is improv. And
I mean,
So to me, I think grounding yourself in your body.
Yeah.
So there's lots of models about levels of listening, like listening to yourself, listening to the other, and then listening to the third body of the conversation. You, me, the room. I think it's okay to move back and forth between, okay, how is this hitting me? What are they saying? Where's this conversation going? Because we have enough attention span.
Yeah, there's a lot of models going on, right? Like,
yeah, I know. Sorry.
No. I mean, like within our brains.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So it's like we're taking in information through, one of our five senses.
Yeah.
And then we're running that through an algorithm, and then probably trying to figure out to some degree, like what is the right course of action, and then based on the feedback, we're constantly throttling, which ironically is kind of how machine learning works.
Yeah, we are large language models.
Yeah.
My friend calls his 2-year-old baby LLM.
Oh, wow. That reminds me of baby GPT, like from like a year ago or whatever. So we've got grounding, we've got right channel.
Yeah. Attend deeply.
And
this is like, just attend. It's a gift. I mean, deeply listening to somebody is a gift.
Yeah.
So I think that's another mental model to help me fully focus on what someone is saying and take myself out of the picture. It's really easy for me easier for me when I'm in a coaching relationship. I'm like, cool, this is about them. And I put myself aside. Whereas in regular conversations with my friends, like, I want to jump in.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I think that's okay and it's natural. But still, attending deeply is really, really powerful. It's a gift most people do not get.
Danny, this just hit me now. You're giving me like Simon Sinek vibes, which he's like one of my favorites. So
thank you very much.
Follow. Yeah.
He's one of the OGs.
Yeah, for sure. And he mentioned something kind of unique, which is when you're in a contentious conversation, rather than responding emotionally, which I think is, wow, it is already 6:00.
Oh my God.
This is incredible. There was a whole bunch of other stuff I wanted. We're going to have to get you
extended episode.
This is sorcery. Okay. Well, if you're just tuning in, we're about to sign off here. We've got Daniel Stillman who wrote Good Talk, and the hour has just absolutely flown by. So make sure you check out more of Silicon Zombies at siliconzombies.com. And Daniel, maybe do you want to give a quick shout out to? Oh, we already hit your website.
Yeah, we remember. You can
Go get the book.
DanielStillman.com.
Brilliant stuff.
You can download a copy, first chapters of the talk.
Thank you so much, my friends.
Thank you, brother.
Okay. All right. Take care, everybody. Wow, that was. Where did the last like 30 minutes go?
I know. We hung out with Johnny for a while.